Hello, networkers, and welcome back to another episode of Ask the Network Engineer, where I will answer one of your questions. In this episode, I want to focus on certification questions that you guys are asking. So this is going to be certification number one. So I thought this would be great because if there's any questions about certifications or like what kind of hardware that you should get or anything like that, I took some notes here. I like to keep that in their own episodes so that you guys can search for particular things that interest you among the different episodes. Because I can understand some episodes may not really apply for you. Some actually may apply. So I want to kind of keep things as organized as possible so that you can search and watch the videos that you think are more important. Again, I'm just here providing as much information that I can that can benefit you guys the most as being network engineers. So again, this is focused on certification type questions from you guys. So let's get started. And the first question is from Dale Brown, and he asks, do you have any recommendations on which switches an aspiring network engineer would need to invest in for a lab setup? I am currently studying for the CCNA, and I would like to have equipment I could use at home. Would there be any additional equipment for the CCNP? Thanks in advance. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about that. Now, there is two types of switches that you should definitely consider for investing. Okay, whether it's for CCNA studies, CCNP, CCIE, or even practical experience that you can get. And that really is layer 2 switches and layer 3 switches. Because a lot of stuff that is being taught now in the CCNA, or a little bit of that, I guess, it's probably more in the CCNP and a lot more with the CCIE, is that we really focus on teaching you guys about the deployments of a two-tier topology. And that basically means that there's two layers to it. And that would be a core and there will be an access. Now, with today's terminology, we're calling it different. We're calling it a spine leaf topology, where the core is the spine and all the access layer switches are the leaves. So the core is typically a layer 3 switch, and the access, the leaves, are typically layer 2 switches. So with that in mind, what should you consider for your layer 2 switches? Now, if you're looking at what hardware to invest in and where to go for that, eBay is definitely your best place to go. I did that starting out. I bought all of my equipment. With the equipment relevant for me at the time, I bought everything off of eBay. Things were very, very affordable. You do not need to get brand new stuff. Don't do that. Cisco routers and switches are very, very reliable. They last for a long time. I also have equipment in my garage that I still use for my own studying, and they still work. Okay, it's running older code and it's not using relevant technologies today, but they still run. That's the point. So look at eBay for all your choices for hardware. In terms of the layer 2 switch considerations for that, I would say probably the Cisco Catalyst 2960. That's a good type of switch that you can definitely use for your studies. You could also consider, this is an older switch, but the Cisco Catalyst 2950. You may consider that. And here's the reason why I say that. Because really, when we talk about layer 2 switching, we're really talking about VLANs, trunking, BTP, spanning tree. Those really are the four major pillars of LAN switching. It really is based on those four things. And you can do all of that on most switches, including the 2950. But if you can definitely invest more for the 2960, I would choose that particular product instead. In terms of layer 3 switches, you got a couple of options. There is the Cisco Catalyst 3560, that's a good one. There is the 3750, that's a good one as well. And there's an older one that you may consider if you can find it on eBay, and that is the 3550 series. So there are some options. Now, when we talk about layer 3 switches, well, what does that really mean and what are they providing? The main thing that we get those switches so we can make our VLANs routable. Because typically, on your switches, like layer 2 switches, for example, you configure all your VLANs, like VLAN 10. That's my user VLAN. Great. Well, if you add another VLAN, like VLAN 11, and that's for our guest users, Well, users and guests, they cannot talk to each other because VLANs are completely isolated broadcast domains. So in order to have these two VLANs communicate, those VLANs need to be routable. So we actually configure what is called a switch virtual interface, or an SVI. And that basically means a layer 3 VLAN interface. And then when we set that up, the IP address configured on that interface will be the default gateway for the users and for the guests. And that will allow them to communicate and talk to each other. So that can only happen on a layer 3 switch. But you can do other things, like you can set up static routing, even dynamic routing, depending on what is supported on that hardware and the software that is installed. You can also set up DHCP locally on that switch, on a layer 3 switch. So there's a lot of things that you can do with that. Another option that you could consider is the Cisco Catalyst 3560CG model, and I actually have one. I actually have one in my lab here, and here's what it looks like. It's a smaller port model with 8 ports, fixed ports, and these are gigabit ports, and it has 2 other ports that can either be RJ45 ports, or I can use an SFP, basically like a little optic for fiber connections, or if I need Ethernet, but I can use these 2 ports here. And you will use a switch like this if you want to do more of the advanced stuff like Cisco TrustSec or MAC encryption type services on it. So that kind of hardware is, again, for the advanced stuff. But if you're doing the CCNA, CCNP, going with the 3560, the 3750, those are good choices to prepare you for those exams, and to, of course, give you more experience with how to configure switches and layer 3 switches also. Now, if you're considering maybe a data center switch for your lab environment, that gets more trickier because all data center switches are extremely expensive, very expensive. Like, let's say that you want to learn about Cisco's latest technology of ACI, basically their SDN solution. And now that requires the Nexus 9000 series. And even if you get like a smaller model of that, one of those switches is going to cost you like $11,000. I'm not even including licensing with that. $11,000 just for that switch. And that's just for one. So you need to get a couple of those. So data center stuff is really harder for us to build in our labs because, again, it's very pricey for the equipment. So we tend to go with remote labs for data center stuff. But I would say that the most affordable switch that you can consider to learn about data center switches, or more importantly about the Nexus switches, because that operates under a different operating system. It uses the Nexus OS or NX OS. And I would say that the Nexus 5000 series is probably a good kind of compromise to get experience with those kind of switches. But if you're buying them on eBay, this is important, you want to make sure that it has the appropriate features that you can use. Because the Nexus switches, they operate based on what features are enabled. So if you want to configure, let's say, OSPF, you have to enable that feature, like feature OSPF. Then you can configure OSPF. So you gotta be very careful if you're buying Nexus switches on eBay, and you need to figure out basically what kind of licenses and features are supported on the firewall, on these switches that you want to buy. Just keep that particular consideration in mind. The last point that I do want to make in regards to your studies for your CCNA and your CCNP is, yes, it is heavily focused on routers and switches. So you got your switch recommendations, and really most Cisco routers are going to be perfectly fine. Like the Cisco ISR series, like the 2800 series. Those are great for that kind of exam and get you prepared for that. But you should also consider the idea of a virtual lab environment using software like GNS3. And the website is gns3.net. It's free, but it is fantastic. It is great for us as network engineers. Because when you get to your CCNP and for your CCIE, there's going to be many routers involved that you have to configure. Now you can go ahead and buy the equipment. There's nothing wrong with that. Or you can at least virtualize them, or kind of virtualize them through GNS, and build these topologies, and you can console in and do your configurations and things like that. GNS has come a long way. So I would definitely say invest the time to learn how that works, because that's what I use a lot of times for the kind of labs that I build for the newer stuff that's out there. And I have one more question, but there are two questions asking the same thing, and I thought it was a great question. And this one is, or one of the questions by Alfredo, and he says that he has his CCNA, his CCNP in routing and switching, and a CCNA in security for a few years, and he is planning to study for the CCNA. But he noticed that today's market, they want someone to know about more technologies than just be an expert on routing and switching. So what is the correct path to take with today's demands on technology? And another similar question come up by Sean B. And he says, are there any certifications besides the CCNA and the CCNP that could help a person break into the industry, such as maybe the Security Plus certifications? So let's go ahead and talk about that next. So the question is, should you learn more technologies, get other certifications besides the Cisco stuff? Absolutely yes. Okay, because the biggest thing is having more experience in multiple technology areas is very important. The days of learning about a single vendor is done. When I was a network engineer several years ago, starting out, Cisco was the dominant player. Okay, but the internet was very simple back then. I remember making websites using something called geocities.com. I'm guessing probably a few of you probably know what I'm talking about. The internet was very basic. There wasn't social media back then. There wasn't what it is now. It was very simple stuff. So the demand and the requirements back then, well, was very simple. So Cisco was a very dominant player in the networking field. Routers and switches, they were praised so heavily on that. And yes, we had firewalls, all right? They blocked based on IPs, port numbers, protocols. And they did a good job, right? Because the internet and the web services back then were very simple. There's nothing really much to it. But as the internet grew and the demand of applications increased, okay, Web 2.0 was something that was introduced several years ago. And now we got into social media. The internet is completely different than what it is before. And because of that, everything had to evolve. And especially with networks, data center technologies, cloud computing eventually emerged, next generation firewalls emerged. And basically Cisco had done a lot of time acquiring a lot of different companies and not really staying really on track on most of their core values. And that allowed other companies to specialize in particular areas, mainly in security and optimization and things like that. And so that's why you see a lot of now companies that are strong leaders in particular areas. I'm talking about companies like F5. F5 is a strong, dominant leader when it comes to load balancing type applications. You look at things like WAN optimization. Riverbed is a strong leader in that particular market space. When you talk about security, there are many players in this market now. You know, Cisco is there. Cisco is a strong player in that market. Don't get the wrong impression. But Palo Alto Networks is a kick-ass particular vendor in that market. They are too strong. All right. Fortinet is also very strong. People simply love the Fortinets because they're great security. They're up to speed on where we are in terms of trends for security, and it's affordable. That's very good. Even Check Point's basically is still in the game. I remember a long time ago when it came to firewalls, yeah, there was the Cisco PIX firewall, but there was the Check Point firewalls, and those were heavily used for security enforcement in the data center at the time. That's 1.0. Now we're like at 3.0, 4.0 for our data center type of topologies. But understanding that is important because things now involve learning multiple technology areas. So there are two certifications that you can definitely consider for what you should actually add to your routing and switching certifications. Okay. One of them is the Palo Alto Network certification. that is one that is definitely growing. A lot of you guys are pursuing that certification. You're getting trying to get the experience and trying to get the blueprints to really prepare and to pass that exam. So that is something that you could definitely consider for adding on to your belt. Another one could be with, let's say, with Riverbed. They also have a certification that is focused with WAN optimization. So those are great combinations. So just imagine this picture for a second, right? So you got your routing and switching. That's the foundation. Palo Alto Networks and Riverbed, that's nothing. You need that foundation as a network engineer, because if not, you're going to be completely lost with these other areas. Okay, so you have routing and switching with Cisco. Okay, they're strong with that. Routers and switches, Cisco is definitely the place to go. Juniper is strong too, though, so you can definitely do that if you prefer that track. Okay, then you got security. You have Palo Alto Network certification, so that looks very, very nice to complement your routing and switching. Then, of course, you have WAN optimization with Riverbed. But Riverbed also is kind of moving in the direction of software-defined WANs. So that looks very nice as well. So that is something that you can definitely consider of adding to your current certifications. There's also programming that also looks very nice as well. So a lot of information, but I just want to give you all the context and what you can consider moving forward. Now, what about Network Plus and Security Plus or A Plus certifications? Look, I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I personally think that those certifications are a waste of time. If you're starting out, don't worry about the Network Plus, go right into a CCNA track. Their foundation, I think, is very good. Okay, it's not the best, but I think it's a very good in terms of the foundation of understanding networking, and then from there, then you can definitely branch out and do different things. But as a professional, there is a particular value that I do see with the A Plus, the Network Plus, and the Security Plus. These certifications are mainly focused on people who have no IT computer experience at all. That means you had never worked on computers before. You never worked on, of course, networks before. And typically the order is you do the A Plus, then you do the Network Plus, then you do the Security Plus, which is, of course, the appropriate order. So I don't know this person, but my wife actually knew a person. They worked in a bookstore. Okay? Zero IT stuff. So yes, getting your A Plus is definitely recommended. Then getting a Network Plus, because he was working in an MSP, which means you got to get involved in different type of areas besides just computers and servers. There's a little bit of networks and security. So then after Network Plus, you'll get the Security Plus. So those certifications make perfect sense if you are starting out and you have no computer-related experience. If you do have computer-related experience, don't worry about those certifications. Just focus on the CCNA, CCNP, Palo Alto Networks, Riverbed, and other IT certifications along the way. And we're done with this episode. So if you have any questions about being a network engineer, or questions about certifications, or just advice questions, anything, post those questions below in the comments and your question will come up in the future episode on this channel. So thank you for watching this video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and support us and check us out at routehub.net. And until next time, keep networking.